protests year after year, all over the world, people are demanding their rights. In California, students are demanding free education. College students want free education in Britain too, and they're willing to smash some windows to show that they mean it. And as the U.S. moves towards nationalized health care, people have been demanding free health care. They say it's a right. All these protesters are saying that they have rights. But is there really a right to an education? Is there really a right to free health care? Is the right to health care just the right to live? What is a right anyway? That's what we need to sort out. To begin, let's look back in history to the founding of the United States. The National Archives here in Washington, D.C. hosts the originals of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights of the United States. The original Declaration of Independence is here too. These founding documents talk about rights. But what kind of rights? Well, the Bill of Rights is comprised of the first 10 amendments added to the Constitution in 1791, right after the Constitution itself was approved. And the first thing to note is that the rights in the Bill of Rights are limits on government. The Bill of Rights says things like, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. It says things like, no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. And it says, the right of the people against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and so on. So rights are restrictions on the power of government. In the Bill of Rights, these come in two types. First, there are general liberties, such as freedom of speech, or the right to bear arms. These say that people in general are free to take some kind of action. Second, there are protections against abusive government, such as the right to trial by jury, or the protection against excessive bail and unusual punishment, or the right to due process of law. And it's worth noting that the 9th and 10th Amendments make it very clear that there are many other rights not mentioned in the Bill of Rights. Now, at the time that the Constitution was written, it was understood that beneath these particular rights lay a basic conception of the fundamental rights of man. The fundamental rights were often stated as life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence summarizes the fundamental rights in these familiar words. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Likewise, the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution in the Bill of Rights, approved 15 years after the Declaration of Independence, emphasizes that there are basic freedoms that, quote, cannot be deprived without due process of law, end quote. The Fifth Amendment says that these basic freedoms are life, liberty, and property. It's clear that the founders of the United States thought that these basic rights were what government existed to protect, and that the government should not violate these rights. They were inherent in human beings. They were unalienable. Today, these same basic rights don't have a clear meaning for many people. What is a right to life, for instance? Does it include a right to free health care? Or ask yourself, what does it mean to have a right to pursue happiness? To form a clearer understanding, we need to get down to the root of the theory of rights. In her essay, Man's Rights, in the book The Virtue of Selfishness, Ayn Rand explains what a right is. She says, a right is a moral principle defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context. In other words, a right defines how other people should leave you free. A right defines the freedom that the government should protect and that it should never restrict. With this in mind, let's look again at the basic rights. Most fundamentally, you have just one right, the right to be free to live your life and support yourself as you choose. That means you're free to act, and you're responsible for yourself and for making the most of your life. The rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or of life, liberty, and property, are aspects of this one right to live freely. In this context, the right to life is the right not to be attacked and killed. The right to life also implies the right to be left alone in your body, the right to use birth control, for example. The right to liberty is the right to take the actions you judge as necessary to live and be happy. Liberty implies the right to work as you choose, to make contracts, to live where you choose, and to say or write what you choose. The right to the pursuit of happiness is the right to take the actions needed to live a full and happy life. It's the right to go after happiness. It's not a demand that anyone else has to make you happy. As we've seen, many traditional statements of the basic rights, such as the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, call them life, liberty, and property. You might think that property and the pursuit of happiness are quite different, but in fact, they're very closely related. The right to property is the right to acquire material things through production and trade for one's exclusive use and control. So it's the right to buy and to sell. It's the right to use the resources of the world to better your life. It's the right to own the fruits of your labor. The right to property isn't the right to be given things. It's a right, like all other rights, to act freely in the material world. Many so-called liberals today forget how important property is. They think it's fine if the government takes your money, in the form of taxes, to build houses and apartments for other people. They think it's unfair if one person is wealthier than another, and they think the government ought to take away the property of some to give it to others. In fact, property is the key right. It's essential to free speech, for example. To silence the dissidents, the communist government of Soviet Russia took control of the typewriters. Today, to silence dissidents, the Chinese Communist government takes control of the internet and the search engines. Property is the right to tell the government, hands off. It means I have a right to live as I choose, in a place I own and use by right. I have a right to express myself as I choose through means I own or use by right. So freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion all actually depend on the right to property. And of course, the freedom to contract and the freedom to trade and the freedom to do business all depend on the right to property too. Property is the key to the freedom to live as one chooses, while respecting the freedom of everyone else. It's the right to pursue happiness as one chooses. A right is really basically an individual right. It pertains to you and to me, and to everyone as individuals. A right doesn't depend on being part of any particular group. And fundamental rights don't conflict. Everyone has the basic rights to life, liberty, and property. Everyone has the right to pursue happiness. Just as all rights pertain to the freedom to live, all rights are freedoms from the initiation of force. In Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand declares this point this way: "So long as men desire to live together, no man may initiate, do you hear me? No man may start the use of physical force against others." It's force when someone assaults you and hits you. It's force when someone steals from you. It's force when they put you in jail for speaking your mind. It's force when they put you in jail for making an honest business deal with someone else who was willing. Now, people have the right to do a lot of stupid and bad things, but you don't have the right to use force against anyone who hasn't attacked you first. Self-defense is fine, but lashing out violently at others certainly is not. Now, as I've said, one person's rights don't conflict with another's. Your rights give you the freedom to act and pursue happiness just so long as you respect the rights of others. This mutual respect for each other's freedom is inherent in the system of private property. It's private property that lets each of us live in the world while not interfering in the freedom of others to do the same. You can have your home and I can have mine. You can have your stuff and I can have mine. Individual rights give one the freedom to make the most of one's life, but it's also the freedom to mess one's life up. And here's the thing, you can't have the freedom to make the right choices unless you have the freedom to make the wrong choices. Being free means being able to act based on one's judgment of reality. If one's free, no threats of violence come between one and the world. In this sense, individual rights protect the freedom of the mind to function. Their price and their glory is that they let you be basically responsible for you. But today, when people demand respect for their rights, are they demanding that the government respect their individual rights? Were the protesters who wanted free education and free health care demanding the protection of their life, liberty, and property? Were they demanding freedom from the initiation of force? Sadly, most people today don't understand what the basic rights mean, and they don't recognize that all rights are freedoms from force. Since the rise of socialism early in the 20th century, the language of rights has become contaminated with a nearly endless wish list of social goals. When these goals are declared to be rights, even though they conflict with the real individual rights, they deserve to be called pseudo-rights. A real right leaves the individual free to act, but a pseudo-right demands that other people provide you with something. The right to freedom of speech is a real right. It allows people to express themselves without being interfered with. It's freedom for artists, and it's freedom for journalists too. Now, but what if we declared a right to be an artist? Maybe this would mean that anyone who wanted to be an artist should receive a subsidy. Or maybe this would mean that no one who said they were making art could be criticized. The subsidy would have to come from someone. The subsidy demands that others be forced to pay the artist. And a right of artists to be free of criticism would mean other people wouldn't be allowed to speak their minds or act on their own judgment. So, because it would mean forcing other people, a so-called right to be an artist would be a pseudo-right. In fact, the only real right to be an artist is the right everyone has, the right to make our own choices in life, including career choices, as long as they don't initiate force against anyone else. Today, pseudo-rights crop up all over the place. There's no better example than the 4 freedoms championed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In the 1941 State of the Union speech, President Roosevelt declared 4 freedoms that government should uphold. Today, many people take this speech as a quintessential statement of Americanism. And there really is nothing more American, as we've seen, than saying that the government should protect freedom. But in fact, the speech was a watershed for pseudo-rights. The first 2 of Roosevelt's freedoms are real individual rights. They're the freedom of speech and the freedom to worship. They really are freedoms. Roosevelt's second 2 so-called freedoms are freedom from want and freedom from fear. Both of these are pseudo-rights. The second 2 aren't freedoms at all, really. You can't get freedom from want and freedom from fear automatically if other people just leave you be. No, other people must provide you with freedom from want. If you don't provide for yourself, it means providing you with clothing and with food and with internet service if the powers that be decide that's a necessity. And in fact, today, there's a government project to provide internet service to the needy, a benefit that Roosevelt himself could hardly have imagined. As to freedom from fear, Roosevelt tied it to reducing the risk of war. And that's a valid goal for government. But in general, freedom from fear means that other people must fend off whatever gives you fear. Norman Rockwell's painting of freedom from fear, which he painted in honor of Roosevelt's speech, captures this perfectly. Rockwell painted 2 parents tucking their kids into bed. It implies that someone must comfort and shelter someone else. It implies that we're the children and the government is our parent. For you to be free from fear, all the things that cause you fear would have to be made to disappear. And that's an obligation without a limit. So it's actually very simple to tell a pseudo-right from a real one. Just ask, what initiation of force is involved in violating this alleged right? And who must act to enjoy this right? If force must be initiated by or on behalf of the rights holder, it's a pseudo-right. If others, not the rights holder, must do the work for the rights holder to enjoy his freedom, it's no freedom at all. Now, with this distinction between individual rights and pseudo-rights clear in our minds, we're ready to diagnose the protests in our opening segment. The university students in Britain and the US wanted free or reduced college education. They said that an education is a right. And an education is a right. It's an aspect of the right to trade. You have a right to attend any school that will choose to accept you. It would be force to prevent you from attending the school if you agreed to its tuition and other terms. But the student protesters want something more. They want someone else to pay for their education. They want the government to force other people to pay taxes, and they want the government to take that tax money and give that money to them and to other students. Free education is a pseudo-right. It's really just robbery when you get down to it. Now, what about health care? Health care means the difference between life and death in many situations when one is injured or gravely ill. So there's no doubt that it's of vital importance. And there really is a right to health care, but it's just the right to seek out whatever medical help one can find and to pay anyone who chooses to offer medical services. But these protesters want free health care. They want free contraceptives and other medicines. They want the government to force other people to pay for their health care. That isn't the right to life. It's a claim that one is owed a life. That's a pseudo-right. Stand up for individual rights. If the government would just protect our rights, we would each be free to make the most of our lives. Our organizations would be based in the individual choices of everyone taking part. There'd be a lot less politicking, and there would be a lot more producing going on. It would pay to be objective and responsible. Society would be more dynamic, too, and exciting. In the long run, real freedom would be better for everyone.